humble and seeking. And we are going to go ahead and just sort of get started right now. So how are we going to operate? Exactly the same way we operated last week. I'm going to ask you all to unplug as much as possible. It'd be nice if you can, completely unplug, but I know, this is real life, and so, but as much as you can unplug so that you can participate and get as much out of this as possible. I'm going to ask you to actively participate. There's some polls, there's some questions I'm going to have to ask you to raise your hands and all that sort of thing. And I'd really like you to participate. This is all about you. This particular part of the webinar is about your development of cultural competence. And so we're going to talk how you do it. How can you be more culturally competent? And that's the whole focus of today. And so participation is a little bit important. Ask your questions like we did last week. We'll have some places to stop. If you have a question of clarity, Ellie will stop me and ask me at that moment. Otherwise, we'll just do questions at the predetermined spots. Share your wisdom. That's what that chat box is all about. So if you've got information that you'd like to share on whatever is being reviewed in the webinar, go ahead and put it in there. The only way we learn is if we share what we know and ask questions about what other people know. I mean, that is how we go through this life and gain the wisdom we need to keep moving forward. And then lastly, let's just enjoy our time together. It's hard on webinars. It's particularly hard for me to gauge what your responses are or anything. I try to keep it interesting and try to keep it entertaining, but all I have is my computer screen staring back at me and it doesn't laugh. So let's just go from there and take a look at what your takeaways are. So today we're going to start with the handout that was in last week's webinar. And so that whole awareness matrix thing. So we're going to start with talking about having a strong self-awareness, and then we're going to look at the components of the cultural competence awareness matrix to kind of get you to think about it. I'm just going to ask my first question here. So here's my question. How many of you have, and if you'd raise your hand, how many of you have actually looked at that handout and maybe completed it? Okay, I'm not seeing hands. Ellie, do you see hands?
Yeah, I see a few. Maybe not everybody understands.
Oh, there it is.
And
there it is. No, it was, I didn't understand how to see it. Okay. Okay, well, great. Yeah, if you haven't gotten to it, that's okay. We're going to go through it today. But what I'm going to say is, I can put this information out there, but I can't make you use it. Just like when you counsel your homeowners, you can give them all the information in the world and you can guide them through that budget revision, but it's all on them to do the work. And that's kind of how it is here. I'm going to share all this information with you, but it's going to be on you to do the work, to become culturally competent. I can't do that for you. I don't have that wand, just like you don't have that wand for your homeowner. I don't have that wand for you, and we're not yet to that Star Trek place where we can do mind melds for each other. And so I'm just going to say this is work. This is work, and you're going to have to do it if this is what you choose to be. If you choose to be culturally competent, you've got to do the work. And then the question is, what do you do with that self-awareness once you have it? And so we're going to look at the cultural competence planning matrix. You see, everything's a matrix in this. And take a look at how you can put together a plan to kind of move forward and become more culturally competent. So that's where we're headed today. So some keys to today. Becoming culturally competent is a process, not an endpoint. There's no end to this. This is a continual knowledge gathering practice sort of thing. This doesn't, there's no place where you say, yep, I'm culturally competent. I got that one, can check that box off, all done. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way at all. And so what you have to be is aware that this is a process, an ongoing process, a lifelong ongoing process. You have to be honest in your assessment. Your assessment is your assessment, not anybody else's assessment. This is not stuff you have to share with other people unless you choose to share with other people. And so you have to get really, really down and dirty honest with yourself about what you know, what you don't know, what you do, what you don't do. This is not a time for trying to make yourself look better, because the only person you're making yourself look better for is yourself, and that doesn't gain you anything. It actually is a hindrance. And so really be honest with yourself. You have to accept where you are. You might not be where you want to be. None of us are. In this process, very few of us are where we want to be. And that's the joy of it, is that we're all trying to get better. We're all trying to learn more and do better. And so just know that it's okay to accept where you are, wherever that is on the continuum. It's okay. And then you have to be willing to do the hard work every day and then the next. And so this is, again, an ongoing process that takes conscious thought on a pretty regular basis about what you're doing, what you're saying, how you're behaving, how you're interacting, what your biases are, all of that stuff. It just has to become a part of how you live your life every single day. So last week we looked at this cultural competency model, and we're not going to go through it again. I'm just going to kind of label it here so that we can remember what all these different parts of the continuum are. So the first one, the culture of destruction, is, assumes one group is better than another. I mean, you might as well call that the Hitler place. I mean, because that's what that one is. The second one, the cultural incapacity, is people who are culturally not competent but don't know it. Excuse me. And they continue to do things over and over again, unaware that what they're doing is being unkind to other people at the very minimum. Cultural blindness, you can think of this as color blindness, is another way that people talk about this one, where I don't see color. People will say that. Well, the truth is you do see color. There's no way not to see color. And what that does is it says we're all the same, and we're not all the same. We come from different places. We come from different behaviors. We come from different practices. We come from a lot of different places. And while we all have similarities, it's the differences that we need to acknowledge and learn to work with respectfully, so that we can keep moving forward to the next one, which is cultural pre-competence, which says, okay, I get it. The world's not colorblind. I'm not colorblind. The color is there. Every other thing around cultural differences are there. And I get it. I get that we're all different. And we try to use that information, but we're not fully engaged with it. We don't totally do it. We do it sometimes and then not other times. We fall down on stuff. This is where a lot of people are. We acknowledge that people are different than I am and that you came from different places, but we have a hard way of, not able to apply that knowledge. So this is where we have the knowledge, but we don't actually have the application. We don't have our arms around the application of it. The next one is cultural competence, and that's where we're pretty much all headed, where you can function in an effective way with variety of different cultures, and you can accept and respect those differences. You make a practice of continually learning and taking that new knowledge and putting it into your behavior. So that's the difference between pre-competence and cultural competence. Is pre-competence has the knowledge. Cultural competence can take that knowledge and put it into practice and have it be the way you behave and where your attitudes are. And then cultural proficiency, not very many people ever get there. They're regarded as specialists. They are the ones that are going to develop the culturally sensitive practices and tell the rest of us, pay attention to this, take a look at this, say, tell us this is how we ought to be operating. They make this their lifelong work. These are people who spend most of their time in this arena. The rest of us don't spend most of our time in this arena. And so very few of us are going to get to that cultural proficiency place. I only know a few of people that are there, and they truly, this is their life work. And so our goal typically is going to be that cultural competence place. So the question then becomes, well, and let me just say, most of us are either in that cultural blindness or the cultural pre-competence place. That's where we are. Until you really start working at this stuff and you really started thinking about it and it starts kind of coming up in your head when you see something happen or hear something said, and you go, oh, until those kinds of things start to happen, we don't move to that cultural competence. And so today we're going to spend time looking at how can we get to that cultural competence. So my question for you right now, and you do not have to share this, but I really want you to take a second here and think about, where am I on this continuum? Where am I? Am I in that cultural blindness, that cultural pre-competence place? Is that where I am? Or maybe I'm in that cultural incapacity place. It's okay wherever you are. There is no shame, there is no judgment about where you are on this. The idea is, if you can figure out where you are, then you can sort of see where you need to go. In so many ways, this is very much like how you counsel your clients, isn't it? And so just in your head, because I know a lot of you are in rooms together, just think about where you're at, because that's going to be your starting point as we go through this. Okay? So when we put that cultural competence awareness matrix out there last week, it has 15 questions on it. And the way it's laid out is there are questions, and then a place for you to put your responses to those questions. And then based on what your response is to the question, there is a column that says, what did you learn? What steps can you take based on your knowledge, on this knowledge, to improve your cultural competence? And so what this does is it steps you through some things you need to think about to really become culturally competently aware. And then this moves you then on to, what can I do to be better? And so we're going to take a look at all of that today. So the question here is, the first question is, were other cultures or races or ethnicities talked about in your childhood home? And the concept here is to think about particular things that happened. And were they tense or were they relaxed conversations? Were they comments rather than conversations? And who initiated those discussions and who resisted them in your family? Answering these questions starts to give you an idea of your childhood cultural awareness. And that a lot of who we are as adults around cultural competence resides in what we were around when we were children in one way or another. And because I'm not going to ask you to answer this question, I'm just going to share with you a couple of examples of mine, and to kind of get you thinking about how this can impact you. I grew up in a small town, a very white town. We didn't have ethnic, cultural diversity. There just wasn't any. Although my mother was a child of the Depression, she'd grown up in this town. In my mom's mind, that there was still diversity, even though every single one of us was white. And so my mom had some biases, some prejudices against some different groups of people in our town. For instance, there were a couple of little girls that I met on the school bus. They were not in my classroom, and so I didn't know them from school, but I met them on the school bus. And I really enjoyed talking to them. They were two sisters. They were a year apart. They were like Irish twins. I don't even think they were quite a year apart. And I went home, and I was telling my mom about these little girls that I'd met. And she said, those are Czech girls. You can't play with the Czech girls. I'm like, that's not their name, Mom. And she says, no, They're gypsies. You can't play with those gypsies. And I didn't understand anything of what she was saying. What she was telling me was that their family was from Czechoslovakia. Their ancestors were from Czechoslovakia. And in my mind, in her mind, anybody who was from Czechoslovakia was a gypsy. Now, those were things that my mom had put together at some point in her life. And so her telling me, you can't play with those little girls. Now, I was the kind of kid you said don't to, and I'm going to try to find a way. Without getting in trouble, I'm going to try to find a way to play, to you know, kind of go around what you told me not to do, especially when I didn't understand it. I didn't understand that at all. I didn't know what questions to ask my mom. But in my mom's mind, those two little girls were people I wasn't allowed to play with. Another example of my mom was we were downtown Youngstown, which we were on the border of Pennsylvania, Ohio. Youngstown was just on the other side of the state line. Youngstown is very culturally diverse. And we were at the ice cream store, and my mom and dad had 4 kids, and kids were out in the car because my dad was old school, and you know, you just didn't drag kids around with you. So he went in to get the ice cream cones because his buddy owned the store. And as we were sitting out there in the car, I was like 8, 9 maybe, and my sister was, I don't know, 6 or 7. And there was a house across the street, and it was a 3-story house, and it had a huge little play set, like a swing set and slide and stuff like that. And there were a ton of kids over there playing. And I said to my mom, I said, would it be okay if we go over there and see if we can play with them, because we're really bored. And she looked over at the house. She looked at the kids outside, and she said, oh, those Puerto Ricans, all they do is have kids. And I'm like, okay, you know, I needed to learn to ask more questions when I was a kid with my mom, is what I know in hindsight. And so that was that. I didn't get to get out of the car, and I had to wait on my dad to bring ice cream cones out. And so a couple weeks later, we were in the town where my mom's relatives, where her family lived, her sisters and brothers. And we were visiting my Aunt Kitty, who had 6 children. For some reason. And I said, Aunt Kitty, are you Puerto Rican? Because in my little child head, people who had a lot of kids were Puerto Ricans. I didn't know that it wasn't, you know, that. I didn't know that Puerto Rico was a place. And so in my mind, that's what it was. So my mom's prejudices and biases caused a lot of confusion for me when I was a kid. And then there was one instance where I grew up Lutheran. My mom had all of us baptized Lutheran. My grandparents gave the land to the town to build a Lutheran church. I mean, even my atheist cousins got to be baptized Lutheran because that's what Grandma said we did. And so we were Lutheran. And when I was young, when I was like 5 or 6, we changed churches because that's when President Kennedy was running for president. And the Lutheran Church was preaching from the pulpit and saying you can't vote for a Catholic. And my mom thought that was absolutely awful that you would say you can't vote for somebody based on their religion. And so we went to the Presbyterian Church because they didn't preach that. And so I actually ended up growing up Presbyterian. And so in some respects, my mom was really biased. And in other respects, she had this open mind. And it was this dichotomy that caught me up a lot and made me think about these things probably earlier than a lot of people think about them that are white growing up in a small town, not having anything in your face every single day. And it was confusing for me. So when I talk about, you know, what was talked about in my childhood home, it's confusion. It was confusion. And so I want you to think about those kind of things as you're going through. You know, it really matters what you heard as a child. And it really mattered what the attitudes and the behaviors were of the adults around you about these topics. People don't generally sit down at the dining room table and say, let's talk about cultural competence. We just don't do that. But we do talk about it in ways that are not direct. Let's go to question number 2. If there were no conversations in your childhood home about other cultures, races, or ethnicity, what did you learn from the silence? So if this never came up, what did that tell you? What does that create in you? What does that vacuum of information and conversation create in a person if it's never spoken about? Does it make it a taboo subject? Does it make it harder now as an adult to speak about those kind of things because you never talked about them then? And so this is something else that you need to think about. Could that be something that's interfering with you being able to talk about it today? And Emily Dickinson said, saying nothing sometimes says the most. And so you need to think about this. So this is question number 2. I'm going to get to a point where I'm not going to remember what question I'm on, but right now I do. So this is question number 2. I want to think about this because you either learn from what was said or you learn from what was not said. My family was very verbal. Most things didn't go left unsaid. And so this silence piece, I can't myself respond to. But there are people I know that this never came up. These topics never came up in their home. And so you need to think, if that was what it was like for you as a kid, you need to think about what impact that had. So the third question was there conflict within your family because of other cultures, races, or ethnicities? Did you have arguments or discussions about integration, immigration, interracial, interfaith, dating, music, busing? Did this come up? And did people get angry about it? Were they heated conflict? You know, and then how was that conflict handled? And what did you learn from the conflict and from how it's handled? And what we're looking for here are these barriers then to how you approach cultural competency today and how you approach these conversations today. If every time this topic came up in your house there was a big old fight about it, then you may shy away from it. You may shy away from talking about it because you're going to accept that these topics equal conflict. And so you need to think about that as well. Okay? So those are other things to consider as you're going through that. And then think about, after you've responded to this, what did you learn from your response to that question? There's a lot of things that this matrix is going to stir up in you, a lot of things. And some of it might not be cultural competence. Some of it might be other things. But you know, the focus here is on cultural competence. Next question is, were there people of other cultures, races, or ethnicities who cared for you, your parents, the buildings, your house, your yard? And if so, how were they treated? And how did their presence and your family's attitudes toward them influence you? When my mom was pregnant with both my brother and my sister, she was on bed rest. And so for, you know, almost 18 months in a 3-year period of time, my mom was pretty much unavailable to physically do things with us. And we had a young woman who was married and had a daughter who was between my sister and I. She was kind of halfway in between our ages. And so she would bring her daughter. She was Filipino. I have no idea where my mom found someone that was Filipino in our area, because honestly, I swear to you, everybody in our circle was white. And but she called this woman her friend. Her name was Rory, and she called her her friend, and she said, my friend is coming to take care of you while I'm not able to get out of bed. And so Rory came with her daughter, and I mean, to me, it was just my mom's friend coming to take care of us. As an adult and looking back on it and having conversations with my mom, and this is somebody they hired to come in and take care of us kids. But in my eyes, and the way she was presented to me, this was my mom's friend. And we were allowed to call her Rory only because she told us we were allowed to call her Rory. If my mother had heard us call her something other than, and I can't remember her last name, Mrs. Whatever, my mom would have had a fit. But she said, just call me Rory. And so for me, and this was the one instance that I can point back to, my mom presented this woman as her friend and someone to be respected in our house. And so that that was my experience with that. Again, I'm telling you, it was a dichotomy for me with my mom. And so this was how other people were treated. My mom, my dad had a house of hospitality. It didn't kind of matter who you were. I mean, I'd go to bed and I'd wake up and there'd be somebody sleeping on our couch or in our guest room. You know, that was kind of the way our house operated my entire life. And so, you know, that hospitality that my parents had extended to anybody that was in the house. But that was the one occasion that I can point to and say, you know, there was how my mom treated this woman who took great care of us. So something to think about. I mean, this is not something you'd normally think about. Pretty soon I'm going to quit talking and answer you guys some questions. So as a child, what stories, what TV shows, what books influenced you the most in your attitudes about people of other cultures or races or ethnicities? And what do you carry with you from that exposure? So think back to the books you read when you were a kid or the TV shows that you watched and what you saw on that TV screen or read in the pages of that book. And how did that influence you? Because those are the ways that a lot of us as children get exposed to other cultures. I mean, for me, one of the first book series that I read was the Bobbsey twins. And I was fascinated by, because this is back in the day before they've revised it now. So those of you who are younger than I am probably didn't read it as I read it, but, and I'm blanking on the maid's name, but her vernacular, I mean, in the book it was basically phonetically spelled. And so I would kind of have to reread those a couple different times to figure out what she was saying, but I was fascinated by it and fascinated by her attitude toward those kids and how she loved those kids even though they weren't her kids. And she wasn't family, and yet she was family. And so for me, that was my first exposure to black people. It was in that book. And so I took a lot from that one character in that book about who black people are and what my expectation was of who they are was from that book. They were caring people. They were loving people. They were funny people. I mean, that was what I took away from that book as a child. So think about the books that you're reading or read as a child and how that's informed your perspective on different races or ethnicities. And then the last question, and I know that this is question 6, in the last question around your childhood, when you look at all of those 5 questions and all of your responses, and you think back over all of the impacts that your childhood has had on who you are today and your view of people of other cultures, races, or ethnicities, what have you learned about yourself? What have you learned? And this is, if I was going to break this matrix up, I would say do these first 6 questions together and really spend some time with them. It's a natural break right there from 1 to 6. And so Aristotle said knowing yourself is the beginning of all wisdom. And so now that you've kind of gotten a handle on everything that influenced you as a child, which is a big influence, then you can start looking at some other pieces of it. I've got a place here to ask questions. So Ellie, do we have any questions?
Nope, we don't have any questions. I'll just comment that somebody did ask about the materials from last week, and please note that Michelle did put into the chat box information about the fact that Part 1 presentation and materials are available through the HOPP portal. But otherwise, I have no other questions.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so now we're going to do a poll. And if y'all remember from last week, this is not my strongest point, but we're going to do it anyway. So I'm going to open it up, and the question is, how would you describe your comfort level of talking to people of different cultures, races, or ethnicities about their culture, race, or ethnicity? And so your choices are uncomfortable, somewhat comfortable, or comfortable. Now I know a bunch of you are in one room, and so you know, I don't know, draw straws, paper, scissors, rocks, you know, something, but pick a a response, and it's been launched. Okay. So let's go ahead and close it. 6% of you said you're uncomfortable. So, and that's fair. That's absolutely fair. If you're uncomfortable with this, then a lot of that may lay in those 6 questions we just looked at that has created your discomfort with this conversation. 41% of you said that you were somewhat comfortable, and 53% of you said that you were comfortable. So that's fabulous that you're comfortable talking about it. If you're somewhat comfortable about talking about it, we're going to dig a little deeper into that. But again, a lot of discomfort that comes from talking to other people that aren't like you comes from things you heard or saw or absorbed in some way, right or wrong. I mean, I learned all about Puerto Ricans after I asked my Aunt Kitty that question because she taught me. And so, you know, all of that plays in. So something to think about how that's making you feel. So let's go to the next one. So there's another poll here. And let's see. I did close it, right? Again, see? This is not my strong point. So, okay. So the next one is, what makes you the most uncomfortable about learning about other cultures? So let's drill down a little deeper. So what makes you the most uncomfortable? Sounding stupid? Offending others? Not knowing how to get started with the conversation? Something else? I happened to be with a group of colleagues a few weeks ago, and I was with 2 African-American gentlemen, and another white woman came up to the table, and she was, you know, it was sort of like a happy hour. It wasn't, but that's sort of what it was. And she just came over and she said, so how do I have conversations with people like you? Kind of not the way to start the conversation, but they were gracious and they started talking to her anyway. So even though what she said made me kind of go, oh my gosh, I can't believe you said that, they didn't let it offend them, and you know, were gracious about answering her question. So I got about half of you voting. Okay. So let's go ahead and close the poll. 8% of you said, I am afraid of sounding stupid. And that's a legitimate concern. The only upside, or the only other side of that I want you to think about, though, is if you don't ask the question and risk sounding stupid, the chances of you doing something that does make you look stupid to other people is pretty high. So better to ask the question and sound stupid than behave in a way that other people find offensive. 69% of you said you were afraid of offending others. And so, I get, oh boy, do I get this. It's hard to just step into that conversation and say, you know, I need to ask this question, but I'm not sure how to ask it. But that's always a good way to start. I need to ask this question, but I don't know how to ask it. So forgive me if I ask it awkwardly. Go ahead and say it. Say what your fear is. I'm afraid I'm going to offend you, but this is information I need to know. And if you're not comfortable giving me that information, could you at least tell me where to find it? The best way is to be honest and humble. And we keep going back to that. And that was why I chose that as this title, because you keep going back to being honest and humble. And if you're honest and humble about your seeking, people will typically respond to it, and you won't offend them. Now, There are some people in this world that are going to be offended no matter what you say, no matter how you say it, no matter how you preface it. They're going to come back and be offended. And that's where you need to step back and take and say, the little Q-tip thing, quit taking it personally. That's not about you. That's not about you. That's about them. And it might be that they're just dead tired of answering questions. I've got a lot of colleagues and friends that are in different cultures, and they're just, their comment is, I'm just tired of educating other people. You know, and so sometimes we have to educate each other. 80% of you said you don't know how to start. I gave you an example a minute ago about how I think you shouldn't start. But I think you can always say, I'm curious. I want to be better. I want to be a better person. And so do you mind if I ask you a question? Or if, you know, I listen in on this conversation, or whatever it is. But just be honest. Now, 15% of you said something else. And I'm going to ask you to drop into the chat box your something else. Something else that makes you uncomfortable, because 15% is a pretty high number. So if you would be willing to type in what that something else is. And I'm going to let Ellie, if you're willing to just kind of monitor that chat box as we go on. Is that okay?
Sure. Yep.
All right. Thanks. All right. So the next question is, do you have friends that are from a different culture, race, or ethnicity than yours? Have you been to their home? Have they been to yours? How are your homes different? And how are they alike? You know, and I have a circle of friends that I get together with a couple times a year. And we were talking about this, and we're all mixed as far as culture and race and ethnicity and a whole variety of things. The common denominator is they are all women who make me laugh. And so we were talking about this. And we were considering going to different people's homes and coming to theirs. And Minnesota is a pretty reserved state when it comes to interactions. When I first moved here, I started, in the wintertime, something called the Hermit Club, because people just don't automatically gather together. It's a very family-oriented state, and people pretty much hang with their families or their friends from elementary or high school. And so, you know, just trying to bring people out is tough. And so going to other people's houses is not normally how we operate in Minnesota. You go to dinner with people that aren't your family or aren't your friends from high school. And so that's just how Minnesota operates. And so we had an interesting conversation about how few people have been in their friends' homes, whether it was a different culture or not, but the differences that we did notice. And so something to think about, because, you know, if you don't have friends that are from a different culture or from a different race or from a different ethnicity, it gets harder to learn about this stuff. You can read about it. You can go on the internet. You can listen to YouTube videos. But until you actively engage with people that are different than you, it's really hard to get culturally competent. And so sometimes you have to make an effort to find people that are different than you, that you can be friends with and have those same qualities of friendship you have with people that are from your culture, from your ethnicity, from your race. But just something to think about. How wide is my circle of friends as far as cultural diversity goes? How wide is it? And what do I learn from being with them about their culture, their ethnicity, their race? So something to think about. All right, so how have you tried to learn about other cultures or races? I mean, a lot of us have, and again, if you've got something you'd like to share, go ahead and put it in the chat box.
So there are a few comments in the chat box, Autumn. I don't know if you want to hear them now or you want me to say.
Sure. Oh, sure.
So in response to your first question about the people who said that the 15% who said it was something else,
right.
One person said that they had a concern about whether or not clients understood them because they speak more Spanish than they do English.
Okay. We're going to get to that.
Okay. And another person said that she often feels like she is viewed as somebody who has white privilege, and that her questing for information isn't sincere, and so it leaves her feeling like she doesn't really want to ask because nobody really believes that she's interested.
Okay, and that's valid.
That.
Okay.
And then,
let me just, Ellie, let me answer the one about the white privilege. And, you know, there's a lot of stuff out there about white privilege. I didn't go there in this particular webinar because you really need like a whole webinar to deal with that. And white privilege is not something that everybody has to figure out how to manage because not everybody's white. And so that is a whole different conversation. But there is a lot of material out there about white privilege and how to manage that and how to work with that. And I don't know who responded to that, but if you would like, you can email me at the end of the webinar and I can send you some of that information and give you some further information about how to manage your own white privilege. So you're aware of it. That's the first step. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I think then you asked another question, and I'm not sure exactly what it was because I was paying attention to what was coming through the chat box. But somebody said, yes, I've had people in my home. I've been to theirs also. The difference I find is in our food culture. I believe we put more importance on food than my friends do. They put importance, as I do, on family and time spent with them. Does that make sense?
And
in response to
yeah, that question was, do you have friends that are from a different culture, and have they been to your home, and have you been to theirs?
Oh, yeah, okay.
And so food is one of the big differences when you go into other people's homes. That is one of the big differences. And so, you know, and the idea that what you see is the differences in the food, but the similarities in the desire about family. And so that's pretty awesome. That's pretty awesome, and something for the rest of us to think about, that you're going to see things that are similar and things that are different. And you learn people differently when you've been to their home. You know things about them when you've been to their home than when you haven't been to their home. And so that was a great response. Any others, Ellie?
Yeah, so another response, I think, to a third question that you asked, that again, I'm not clear what the question was, but the answer is to learn, ask questions, try to be open to opportunities to see and visit other cultures.
Okay, so that would be this slide. So how have you tried to learn about other cultures, races, or ethnicities? Now tell me what the answer was again, Ellie.
To learn, ask questions, try to be open to opportunities to see and visit other cultures.
Yeah, okay. And that's being open and looking, seeking those opportunities to get to know other cultures. That's really important because, and there are a lot of opportunities out there if you start looking for them. A lot of opportunities.
Somebody just put into the chat box that library events, college events.
Exactly. And a lot of times there's cultural events like festivals and things like that. And we need to take advantage of that, you know, as a learning opportunity for us. If you have kids, as a learning opportunity for them, and really try the cuisine and look at, you know, the different customs and get to know the history a little bit. All of that is important. All of that is really, really important. You know that about your own race, your own ethnicity, your own culture because you grew up in it. And it's an important part. Think about how important your customs and your food and how you are as a family and how you interact as a social construct. All of that is really important to who you are as a person. And so it's just as important about people that are from other races, other ethnicities, other cultures. And so that's something you really, really want to try to find ways to take advantage of. It's how you can get involved in in ways that you wouldn't normally be able to get involved. Okay.
So
anything else?
Yeah, I do. I want to say that somebody commented that the training is awesome and that they're really enjoying it, but there's a lot left and there's only like 10 minutes, and will we be able to get through it all, or will there be a third session? So
we're going to get through it all.
I guess that's kind of a let's speed things up, and also this is great and we love it.
Thank you. Thank you. So we just talked about, somebody had a comment about someone who spoke Spanish. And so think about people who might have limited English skills. And do you consider that they might be proficient in their own language? So for instance, I am all over the country all the time, and I'm in cabs a lot, or Uber or whatever. Anyway, I talk to the drivers because a lot of times the drivers didn't grow up in America. And so they've come from different places. And I have been amazed at how many total professionals were driving cabs because they couldn't pass the license exams in the United States because of their English issues. And so, I mean, I had one guy drive me around that was a surgeon, you know, and another one that was like this nuclear physicist kind of dude. But, you know, because their language skills wouldn't allow them to pass the test and they wanted to make some money, particularly to get their kids through school. And so we need to think about the fact that even if they're limited in English, they're not limited generally in their own language. And here's what I want you to think about. So there's a couple of sentences. Do you understand what that says? I don't understand what that says, except that I wrote it and then I translated it. It says my best friend is Finnish. And that's her native language that you just saw. She speaks Finnish, Japanese, and English flawlessly. She never makes fun of me just because I can only speak English and swear in German. And so one of the things we need to remember is we're here in the United States and we speak English, and you know, other people struggle with the language, but if we were in other countries, we'd struggle too. So what we need to be is have some empathy for that situation and address it. Again, if you always go back to honesty, if you say, you know, I see that your English is limited, and so I'm going to try really hard to explain this to you as clearly as I can, or have somebody in your office that speaks the language of your clients. That's the best practice, that can explain what you're trying to say to them. So the other thing I want to just caution you is look at your tone and your demeanor. They're not deaf. They're not deaf. You don't have to talk louder to talk to them. And a lot of times tone comes across. I don't care what language you're speaking. People understand condescension, and they understand that tone. And so just be careful about that. Have you attended events in your communities that could build awareness of their culture, their race, their ethnicity, so that when you're dealing with clients that are different from you, you understand it and you can actually have a shared, you can say, oh, I went to this festival and we had this food and it was so good. We really enjoyed that. Now you've made a common bond with your client. And so if you haven't done that, think about what's keeping you from attending. We're all busy, but we all make choices of what to do with all of those hours in every day. Sometimes we need to make different choices. If you could ask one question of any one person of a different culture, race, or ethnicity than yourself, what would it be? And I would like you to type that into the chat box so that we can talk about that at the end here. So we just went through some questions, so I'm going to come back to that at the end. I wanted to review something that we talked about last week. Cultural competency is not merely knowledge, but it's a way of thinking, a way of speaking, a way of relating to people entirely within the context of their cultural background. So you need to make cultural competency a part of how you operate, altering your practices to meet your clients' needs. That's what this is all about. However, cultural competency is a very personal thing, and you're gonna use it in all parts of your life. We also covered this last week, that cultural competency emphasizes the idea of effectively operating in different cultural contexts, and that obtaining cultural information and then applying that knowledge. So again, just because you know that there's differences doesn't make you culturally competent. When you apply that information, Now that gets you closer to cultural competence. And so what we have to have is a set, and this is the piece that I want you to remember the most, a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, policies that allow you to work effectively cross-culturally. So that how you think inside, what your attitudes are within you, and what your behaviors are on the outside, and the policies that your organization works within, all of them work together hand in hand. That's an important aspect of this. Because, again, we got to go back to that honest, humble, seeking piece. Last week we also talked about intellectual humility and just being able to evaluate yourself. So that whole tool that I've given you to evaluate yourself, be honest with it. Get to know what you don't know. Your knowledge of your own ignorance is a huge piece at getting better at this. I know that I don't know. That's powerful. I know that I don't know. I'm dumb. Some of the stuff we're just dumb about. And so the only way we get from being dumb to getting smart is by asking questions and putting ourselves in places where we can be around other ethnicities, races, and cultures. And then the other piece of it, so intellectual humility and intellectual empathy, those are the two foundations of being culturally competent. And intellectual empathy is to have an awareness of the need to put yourself in the place of others so that you can genuinely comprehend them. Not understand, because we haven't had their experiences, but comprehend where they're coming from and why they might be in the place that they're at. And to have intellectual empathy is to accurately reconstruct the viewpoint. So you can say, okay, I get it. That's what's going on here. And to reason from the premises, the assumptions, and the ideas from other than your own. And so you get that they had childhood experiences that formed who they are. And a lot of that was cultural. A lot of that had to do with their ethnicity or their race. And you get all of that. And you're able to say, okay, they're not trying to be rude to me. That's because of this. And you apply that. The opposite of it is self-centeredness. And that is really the other side of cultural competence, is being self-centered when, you know, it's about me, and you need to figure out how to deal with me. And so just something to think about. So the cultural competence awareness matrix, here's what we're going to do. We're going to complete that awareness matrix. That was part of last week's materials. We're going to set it aside for a couple of days. We're just going to let it sit because some of this stuff is raw. It really brings out some raw emotions. And then you're going to review those questions again and then add some additional thoughts. And then the best way to do this, especially as the group that you all are, is to meet with your coworkers who have also completed that awareness matrix and agree that your meeting is about awareness, not about right or wrong behavior, but just coming together and saying, oh my gosh, I want to do this and I want to be better and let's do this together. And then restrict judgment. Oh, I can't believe you said that. No, let's just put that all aside. Let's be kind to each other. So you start with the question one as you're all together, and you share some thoughts and reflections that you're comfortable sharing. No one's required to share within any question, but it doesn't help if you don't share something. And then continue that same process with the rest of the questions. And if you need 2 meetings to go through this, break it from that 1 to 6, because those are the childhood questions, and then 7 through 15 are other questions about how you can, things you can do differently and things that you've done. And I'm just going to say, step it outside your comfort zone is where this is all going to get better. You know, where we are with ourselves, that's good, but until we step outside of that, then we're not going to be comfortable. Or we're not going to learn. I'm sorry. We're not going to learn. So let the magic happen. Step outside your comfort zone. See what happens. Just do it a little bit. See what happens then, and then you'll be encouraged to do it more. So the way you would close that meeting then is, what did I learn about myself? These are questions that you would talk about. What did I learn about my coworkers? What surprised me the most? Where do I need to, where do I need to go? No, where do I need to do the most work? That's what that says. Where do I need to do the most work? And then what can the organization do to support building a culturally competent staff? So those are the debrief questions that you would ask. And so you've got then your awareness matrix. It's completely filled out with answers to your response and what you learned and all that sort of thing. And then we need to take it to a planning. And I mean, this is your action plan. And so we're going to take those answers you had about what did you learn and what steps can you take, and you're going to move those over. You've got the planning matrix. That's in your materials for this week. And those become your goals, your steps to cultural competence. And so you're going to put those in the boxes that are provided to you in that document. And the reason it's in a Word document is so you can keep adding lines if you need to. And then you're going to look at it and say, what can I do right now to be more culturally competent? What can I do right now? And what can I do in the next 3 months? And put a start and end date to these things. And then what can I do midterm? And what can I do long term? That's a year or more out. And remember, it's an ongoing, lifelong process, okay? Allow yourself room to breathe when you're doing this. Everybody becomes an overachiever when they're putting together a planning document of any kind. Don't be an overachiever. Allow yourself room to breathe. Allow yourself to be successful with this. Keep in mind your ultimate goal is to keep learning all the time, that it's a lifelong learning process, and review this thing regularly. If you can look at it once a month, that'd be great. You know, that might not happen. So you look at it once a quarter. You look at it regularly. And again, honest, humble, seeking, keep those things in mind. So now, final questions. Ellie?
So I just want to be respectful of people's time because we are right at 1 o'clock. So if people are able to stay on, that's great. If you're not, that's also fine. It did end at 1 o'clock. So thank you for participating if you have to leave. And if you can stick around for a couple more minutes, that's great. The one thing that somebody said that they would love to say, I think that was what you asked. What is something?
Yeah.
The one thing you'd love to say.
Yeah.
Why do you think that you are able to speak with me and at the same time discriminate against other races and think that I won't be offended by that?
Uh-huh. That would be wonderful to say, wouldn't it, to those that are being actively discriminatory. Oh, yeah. You know, and you wonder if they would hear it. But that's great. That's a great comment. Got anything else, Ellie?
Yeah, somebody else wanted your email information, and I believe that it's in the papers, right, in the documentation?
It's in the materials. It is in the materials. So, yeah. So,
and that's it.
All right. So we're going to close with, one day you'll wake up and there won't be any more time to do the things you've always wanted to do. So do it now. I spent 10 days in the hospital last fall with some pretty scary possible diagnoses, and all I could think about was all of the things that I hadn't done. That really, more than the pain, more than anything else, that kept me awake at night. And so I want you to think about that. If you were to be told, you've got, a friend of mine was just told 1 to 3 months. You got 1 to 3 months left. What is it that you would do right then? And figure that out and do it today. Do it now. Start doing it now. And then I just want to thank all of you for participating, for listening, for being involved in this. I love my New York people. I love coming to New York. Well, let me say this. I love New York once I get there. My travel there is never, ever a fun thing, but I love it once I get there. And so I just want to thank you for your part in my journey, because it really has made a difference to me. You all have changed me and added to my world, and I just want you to know that. So, and then, you know, we're at the end. So thank you, thank you, thank you for participating. Thank you for listening. I look forward to seeing you later this spring or early summer, whenever it is we're coming up there. And thank you, Ellie. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Becky, for everything that you've done for everybody up there and all the counselors. And just know, you guys, that I know you don't get thanked enough, everybody out there, but every morning I say a quiet thank you for you, because I know you're out there changing the world. So go do that some more, and have a great holiday weekend if you celebrate Easter. And I look forward to seeing you and hearing from you. And I know they've got some closing comments they want to make. So I'm going to turn this back over to Empire Justice.
Well, thank you, everybody. And Michelle, I don't know if you have any closing statements at this point.
Oh, the only reminder I have is just to, please complete the evaluation when you receive that.
And ultimately, Part 2 will also be available on the portal. So if you need to review this, you can review Part 1 and 2 on the portal. Thanks, everybody.
Within the next day or so.
Take care.
Bye.